Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Louisiana King here. Friends and I were walking around the swamp due to boredom when no fucking shit a swamp boat comes rolling up. Old dude comes out and asks what we were doing here. Told him we were just wandering around and shit. Gave us a long look and invited us in for crawfish. We accepted and ate at least 20 pounds and smoked some dank weed. Apparently, someone's been messing with his traps, so he was suspicious of us, but we didn't have anything. Louisiana hospitality is great.
I heard a story once about some campers that went up in the Rockies. They found some cave system and went for a poke around. In the cave was some rednecks who had been there for 3 generations after a mad preacher had taken them in there to avoid the judgment day. Needless to say, it was a bit awkward as the campers were all Muslim. In the end, everyone got along and had cake and tea. The creepy thing was all the hillbillies were called Saul, even the women.
Well, now I wouldn't call any of this shit paranormal, but I might as well tell you guys about it anyway. I have a lot of relatives who live in and around the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee. I only really ever see them once a year at our family reunion that takes place in this terrifying old Southern Mountain Baptist church, but my dad will tell me stories about them when he calls me. I'll start off talking about my great aunt, who I'll call Sally. She was like the embodiment of every stereotype you've ever heard about old cougar redneck women. She was a chain-smoking, lotto-playing, meth-dealing pimp. Her 3 kids, who I'll call Emma, Joe and Steve, were no better. Emma dropped out of high school to have 3 kids, got addicted to meth, and according to my dad, sold her baby girl to her boyfriend's pedo dad, who now has custody of the baby, in exchange for drugs. Nobody knows where she is, but the last time we saw her she didn't have her kids with her, and all her teeth were missing. Joe, on the other hand, has about 6 children from 6 different women. He's constantly on the lam from the law and once again, sells and smokes a shit ton of meth. He got into an argument with my uncle once over who was going to cut the grass at the family cemetery and showed up at his house with a fucking shotgun. He burned down my great-grandma's barn because he was hiding a meth lab inside of it. Steve is a little different because he's happy, but he's HIV positive and that makes him kind of a black sheep from the family. My grandma won't let him eat off her plates because down in their region nobody really understands how HIV works. However, rumor has it that he's one of those bug spreader types who intentionally tries to give HIV to the largest number of people possible. The 4 of them worked together on some straight-up shady shit a few years ago. My great-grandmother was dying and Sally, my grandma's sister, was taking care of her. Apparently, she refused to give my great-grandma her medication until she would change her will so that my grandma was completely cut out of it, and that everything went to her and her 3 no-good kids. So, flash forward to last year. Sally suddenly wins $100,000 in the lottery. Now she's been playing scratcher tickets for at least 40-odd years and she suddenly wins out of nowhere? Everyone just thought it was dumb luck and that since she'd been playing so long it was about damn time for her to win. But then about 6 months later she has a sudden, massive heart attack out of nowhere, and they find her dead in her house. Here's the fucked up part. People had always suspected Sally of being involved in some weird occultist shit because of something that people refused to tell me about happening in the 80s, and when they found her there was literally blood all fucking over everything. Her blood. But they couldn't find any cuts on her body and there wasn't any blood coming from any of her orifices. This is where I come in. Sally was in the possession of a red diamond ring that originally belonged to my great-grandmother when they found her dead. The story behind this ring was that during World War I an American soldier got this ring from a dead German housewife and brought it back for his niece, who was the best friend of my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother, her best friend and her best friend's pregnant sister had been accused of witchcraft by a local priest. The day before her friend and her friend's sister, who the priest claimed was carrying the Antichrist, got their heads blown off by this guy, my great-grandma's friend entrusted her with this German ring. So, time passes and my great-grandmother dies, and Sally steals this ring. Initially she wanted this ring to go to Emma, but on her deathbed my great-grandma told someone that she wanted this diamond ring to go to me. So, my grandma sneaks into Sally's house after she dies and steals this diamond ring back. However, before Sally croaked, she told her kids that they weren't to let that ring out of their sights because of its value. Now I've been given threatening warnings down the grapevine that if I try and claim this red diamond ring when my grandma dies, then I'll get royally fucked up. I'm not exactly the jewelry-wearing type, but I have to know what the fucking deal with this ring is. I know it's got a huge monetary value, but there's all this weird stigma and superstition about this fucking ring in my family that I have to try and get it.
Sweet here, don't know if creepy, but up north in the middle of nothing I encountered some creepy hillbillies. I was on my way to my grandma when we drove through some small hick village. My grandma told me some stories from there, like one of them stabbing another one with a pitchfork. No police became involved either. I laughed.
Remember reading in some paper about a guy that had been out hiking. First days he'd felt he was being watched, but didn't care too much and had set up camp in the forest. The next day he woke up to see that something had been poking around the camp. Some canisters were missing. He had continued hiking and started moving up a hill where he saw two men standing. He didn't care too much and carried on upwards, but they opened fire on him with a rifle and he jumped behind a stone and then ran back to his car. Car window had been destroyed.
Stop at gas station outside Bomb, Alabama. Cashier takes a liking to my friend's daughter, a 17-year-old girl. Friendly conversation while we were paying, then he starts to get creepy, says to her,
I wouldn't mind taking you out back, girlie. Haha, you got a fine ass.
She laughs it off and calls him a kidder. He takes offense and starts getting uppity. I attempt to calm him down. He notices I'm British from the accent, thinks that I'm her boyfriend, starts shouting off at me, calling me a friend, etc., telling me to get the fuck out of America, telling her she's a traitor. His friend comes out of the back of the shop. Now they are both having a go at us. She makes for the door. I follow in the typical well fuck this fashion. They run out to us, one with an old wood baseball bat. My friend starts getting flustered, and stupidly walks up to confront them. One of them grabs her arm and the other starts to approach me, telling me to stay put if I know what's good for me. I jump into the back of her dad's pickup, looking around for something I could use as a weapon. The one who has my friend's arm starts trying to tug her into the shop, shouting to his friend, this one's all mine, get that fucking friend. I found a red metal box with emergency painted on the top, popped it open as the fat bastard was climbing onto the truck, found her father's flare gun inside, took a flare from the top, pushed it into the barrel and shouted, let her go or your friend is fucked. His friend lets her go. I tell the other one near the truck to back away while she gets into the cab. She started the engine. As we drove away, they screamed about how they were going to bring their car around and we would be sorry. Sat outside in the back of the pickup for almost an hour while she bolted down the freeway towards Good Hope. Fuck hillbillies.
Not sure if creepy or not, but whatever, a hillbilly story is a hillbilly story. So we live in place with a considerable amount of them. Through on New Year's Day while we're driving, a turkey came out of nowhere and hit the front of our car before, I guess, somehow landing on the other side of the road in a clearing. We pulled over and the turkey couldn't keep up. We have no idea what to do. until this white beat-up car pulled over and two guys got out, old young and old middle-aged. The other one wearing a dirty torn-up wife beater and a baseball cap with his nasty ass hair all over the place. So, anywho, they asked what happened and we told them. They then asked if we wanted to keep it. So obviously no, when we told them that, their faces lit up and they asked if they could have it. We looked at each other before reluctantly saying sure. They then went on to tell us about hunting and whatever and how our dents in our car would cost so much money before throwing the turkey in their backseat and taking off.
I remember driving by some old shitty town, had to stop to pick up some motherfucking soda. Some guy, it was such a stereotype, was sitting in a rocking chair, with a cap on, making sure his rifle was shining. He even had a motherfucking eye patch. I almost took a picture of him, but the store owner said, "Wouldn't do that if I were ya, old Bud's got a thing about strangers." The worst part is, they only had Pepsi and beer. I left, and Bud was staring after my car. Old Bud's probably cleaning his rifle still.
Not paranormal, but a work friend of my mother's who is originally from some real backwater area miles outside the city told us a story about a crazy family, one of those comically large, uneducated and, possibly, inbred ones who have about 10 rusty old cars and other junk strewn around their yard, that she lived near. One of their babies died from SIDS or something only a few weeks after birth, and before they bothered to tell any authorities or anything, they dug a hole in their grandfather's grave, and dumped the baby in it before filling the grave, like it was a family pet or something. When they heard, the authorities did an investigation. There wasn't any foul play or anything involved. They were just feral people who probably didn't think anything of just dumping a dead baby into a hole in the ground.
I've got a couple good ones, since I live in Missouri and they're all hicks outside of the major cities. My brother-in-law once got very lost due to following some faulty GPS directions on the way home. We were driving the same way, so we went to go find him. He had driven all the fuck back down some dirt road, and then tried to turn around and got stuck. The rest of us, 3 vehicles, driving down this little podunk road attracted some attention. Packs of hunting dogs chased the car, and since I'm female I was instructed to stay in the car while they got my brother-in-law's truck out of the mud. One hillbilly presumably heard the noise and came out to see what the fuck we were doing on his property, and rightly so, and was carrying this enormous shotgun. He didn't offer to help or anything, just stood and watched us with this enormous gun until the boys managed to get the truck out and we all left. Dogs chased us all the way. Got another story here in a sec. This one actually happened to my dad, but whatever. He was backpacking all over the country. I'm not exactly sure where he was when this particular story took place, and hitchhiked with one of his friends quite often. They were hitchhiking around some highway and got picked up by 2 hillbilly types. They were in a truck with a shell on it, so my dad and his friend sat in the back while the 2 hillbillies sat up front. After a few minutes, they realized the hillbillies were taking them somewhere odd. They were driving back into the woods, where they had just come from, although they had asked to be taken to the nearest town. My dad and his friend knew instantly that something was wrong, and prepared themselves to escape the back of the truck when the vehicle slowed down enough. They were in the middle of the woods and the drivers of the truck suddenly slammed on their brakes, got out of the front of the truck and came running to the back. As soon as they opened the doors to the back of the shell, my dad and his friend burst out and just started running. He said he's never been so scared in his life. He had no idea what they planned to do, but it sure wasn't normal.
Been to Arkansas, got lost and ended up in this backwoods little village type thing. No fucking idea how. They all had that fucked up way of talking. If you have been there you know what I mean. Every word sort of begins with th, anywho. They all sort of looked like ops picture and started banging on our car. Not too surprised. The government used to test shit on backwoods people like them a long time ago and really fucked some of the population up over there. It's not really paranormal, but it sure as hell is creepy. My father worked in the PA State Police in a portion of the state not far from Harrisburg. If you're familiar with the state, you could probably guess the county fairly easily. Anyway, he responds to call. I forget what for, at some good old boys rundown shack in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. Hanging from the porch are a number of animal carcasses, mostly dogs and deer, which have been gutted and or partially skinned. One dog in particular had been dressed in a skirt and halter top of some variety. My dad's a hard ass, but telling that story makes even him wince. TL. Dr. State trooper finds a redneck's necrozoophiliac playhouse, is scarred forever.
Parents bought 100 acres outside of Houston. Located about 20 miles off the highway off a dirt road. Had an abandoned one-bedroom shack. Well, I would not even call it a shack. It was just some tin panels thrown together with a stove in the middle of it. Also has a smokehouse out near the woods. Bought the property from the deceased owner's oldest son. The youngest son, I guess he's what you would call a waterhead, severe mental retardation, hydrocephalic, had been living in an old hog smokehouse on the property. Older brother, who was a real shithead and straight out of Deliverance, literally kicks his brother out, burns down the shack and smokehouse, and flees town. Younger brother starts living out in the woods that back up to the property. We start to build a house on the land. Occasionally we would see him at night with our spotlight, walking across our field looking severely emaciated. Leave plates of table scraps out for him for over a year, he would usually eat them. We never saw him closer than 50 feet away, and even then it was at night. I had thought about calling the county to see if they could help him but never got around to it. After a year or two, he stopped taking the food. Find pieces of bone last year while fishing in the creek near where he used to bed down at. Feels bad, man. I made a wood box to put it in and buried it out near the creek where I found it.
When I was younger, I lived in South Carolina for 3 years. I was born in the North, so I was automatically considered a Yank, and looked down upon by my peers. It was a pretty shitty time, to say the least, but I have a plethora of shit that had happened to me, with hillbillies and normal, southern people. For example, there was this farm about 5 miles from where I lived, Polly's Island, if you want to know. It was rather quaint, only about a mile from the ocean, and there was only a single-lane road that drove through the property. At one point on the road, there was the house on one side, and the barn on the other. These people were well known for being hillbillies, inbreeding and such. I believe that the owner of the farm had married his first cousin, and another one had a kid with his sister. They were also well known for being mean fucking people. They would put stuff in the middle of the road, and when a car comes by, there wouldn't be enough room to go around. The stuff would be random things. Once they used a couple logs, sometimes a big heap of scrap metal, whatever they could get. When the people got out of their cars to move the stuff, the family would come out and terrorize the person. They'd physically assault them, verbally harass them, and damage their car. The police refused to answer calls coming from that road because even they were afraid of that family. It happened to my family once. We were still new to the area, and we didn't know about this. My father was driving, and there was a heap of barbed wire laying across the road. My mother and my brother were in the car as well. My dad isn't one to be intimidated easily. He was a Mason and was pretty strong. He got out, and the family just descended on him. My mom called the cops, but they didn't come. They broke my dad's nose and gave him a pretty bad laceration on his arm. They tried to pull my mom out of the car, but she had locked the door. They broke the window. They tried to get me and my brother out of the car as well, breaking the windows to the back seat. My dad got back into the car before they could pull me out. Those grimy hands on my arms still give me nightmares, and their voices, oh God. It made me shudder listening to them talk, if you could even call it that, and backed up almost 6 miles before we hit a road we could turn around on. We had to go to the hospital because of my dad, and my mom had gotten a shard of glass in her eye. It was pretty traumatizing.
I was out playing in the woods near our home with my sister, 10 at the time. We were playing tag, and due to my sister being a damned good runner, I lost her. I figured she had gone back home when I spotted a group of hillbillies. I climbed up a tree to get a better look, and when I got to the top, my tiny testicles jumped up and hit the back of my throat. They had my sister in the middle of them, and they were trying to get her to get into the back of a truck, not touching her, just coercing her, trying to get her to play a game. I was panicking and looking around for anything I could use when I heard her start to scream. One of them had grabbed her by the hair and the other pulled her feet so she tripped onto the floor. I scrambled down the tree and ran towards them. I screamed, "Get off my sister!" I charged at the one who had by now gotten on top of her and smashed his head against the wheel of the truck. My sister got up and ran for her life while the one I assaulted picked me up by the neck. His face was bright red with anger and his breathing was heavy as hell. He slammed me against the door of the truck. I fell to the ground screaming. He went into the cab and took out a baseball bat while the other two scrambled to hold me down, and just as he drew up to strike me, I heard a boom in the background. My dad had let off a warning shot into the air and was now pointing it at them. He just said, "Drop the bat. Get into that hunk of shit and get lost. I won't tell you twice." They jumped in, and as they started the truck up, one of them stuck his fingers up at my dad. He shot at the truck and blew their taillights out, made it really easy for the local cops to find. Thanks, Dad.
A few years back, me and my mom were spending a weekend up north in Michigan, around the north parts of the lower peninsula and southern parts of the upper. If you only live inty far south or the state, or outside the state at all, you should know that Michigan is pretty much all forested, small communities anywhere north of the Saginaw Bay area, and quite a bit below it in the west. My hometown, which is in the intersection of 3 major cities here, is even known for having a concentration of hicks and inbreds, and it's not too difficult to believe. The Upper Peninsula, which many Lower Peninsula people would rather just not be part of the state, and I'm sure the feeling is mutual up north, is thought of pretty much as coast-to-coast Canadian, hillbilly hybrids living in the massive forest that we call half a state. Anyhow, we're vacationing up north for a weekend, and we spend a day on our drive up in Traverse City, which is known here for its cherries, and it was a relatively nice place. I'm content with browsing local shops and that sort of thing, but my mom wants to drive up along this little peninsula jutting out to the north of the city, and see what there is to see, because the tourist help places are all raving about how cool and natural it is and shit I didn't really care about. But whatever, can't hurt. We drive up, visit some parks, see some dunes and beaches, mostly boring shit. We get to the top of the peninsula, and there's a state forest up there, and a place to drive your vehicle in, so we go in, because, why not? This was mistake number 1. Let me first say that this ended up being the thickest, darkest forest I've ever been in. It was creepy as shit, and you couldn't see more than I'd guess 3 meters or so from the trail. The canopy was so thick that there wasn't much light, and it was really quiet. Except for our Blazer, which was having a hell of time, considering that this vehicle trail thinned down to barely large enough to fit the thing on it, our mirrors nearly hitting trees on either side. And the trail is like a fucking roller coaster or some shit, dipping and heading to steep short hills every few feet. We almost couldn't go up one of the lumps, and we barely managed to get the vehicle from falling over back over front when coming back down it. I was freaking out, and it didn't help that I was joking about the melon heads, which is a local legend about some kids with some disease that swelled their heads escaping an asylum and living in the forest I had read about from a Weird Michigan book I bought back in the city, so we were both freaking out because of the vehicle. And we were paranoid about fat-headed freaks attacking us from this creepy-ass forest. There was no way to turn around, so we pushed on, and eventually another trail branched off from it, and the sign said the name of a town or something, so we went down it. 5 minutes of evil forest later, we break through to a massive fucking field and a crappy dirt road. Pretty normal for Michigan. The whole farm thing was complete with some huge-ass old barns and a 1950s-looking 3-story house on the opposite side of the road. We're driving through, and we stop really quick so we can see if anyone's home to give us directions. So, I get out of the car, my mom's still sitting in it, run up to the old-ass, shoddy, run-down house, knock on the shitty old screen door, and wait. Nothing, so I knock on the inside door. Someone comes to the door. It opens. 80-year-old looking woman, hair all gray and face all melty looking and wrinkled, is standing there in some ratty, dirty, smelly, old-looking pajama dress things. And she says something, but I can't understand her. I asked if she could give us directions back to the town closest to here, and she said something again, but I couldn't understand her, again. I try to apologize for my lack of understanding, but a distant gunshot scares the crap out of me and makes me jump. She laughs and I spit out some stupid justification for my jumpiness, when I hear someone say something to my left. So, I turn, and I see some big, fat, bald, Earl type looking guy in a dirty white t-shirt and blue jean overalls. Not kidding. And he's strolling towards me, and he asks what the fuck I'm doing with his mom, and I try to explain that we just need directions, but the guy freaks out and starts shouting at me, so I put my hands up in a "I don't mean any harm" type deal, and back off the little stone porch thing in front of his door, and get in the car. We reverse out of the driveway, onto the dirt road and start on down it. The guy starts jogging after us, but he's fat and slow and doesn't go very far. After 10 minutes of empty fields, we reach a town, and get directions.
Chilean here. We do not have hillbillies per se, but while reading this thread I remembered the time I met people that were hillbillies by definition. They were white, wild, aggressive and creepy ass shit. Me and my little brother were looking for our dog, who got lost 2 days ago. We searched for all over the neighborhood searching for her, but with no results. It happens to be that we live in a small city, and just between the rich people at the west, and the wannabes, cholos and Nazi wannabes at the east. That's not a good place to go, but it was one of the possible places our dog may have been. We asked everywhere, until a lady told us that the people that lived in the hill found a little dog similar to ours. So, we went there, ignoring what kind of people they were. It was kind of far from the border of the city, but not too much. We walked up to the top for 10 minutes, and it was a dry wasteland, which contrasts with the forests near there. Then we found what seemed to be a settlement of sorts. There was a small house made up of wood and parts of cars, a cabin and some animals, 2 horses and some goats. Then a lady came. It was a white old woman, fat and rusty, but friendly though. We told her about our dog and then she called his son, a tall, fat trucker-like guy who looked us with a "not my friends" stare all the time. My little brother began to talk, and since he doesn't know where to stop, he just went ahead telling every detail. I began to feel nervous because the guy began to take interest, and make questions about where we lived, and I didn't know how to stop the little moron without being suspicious and make him mad. It was then when we heard a dog screaming in pain near to us. The scream came from the back of the house. I made my move, and just told him that we had to go, took the hand of my little brother and run down the hill as fast as I could. Then I heard that some people killed dogs to feed their own dogs. By the way, we found our dog. 2 potheads helped us to find here in the forests near to our house. I never went back to the hills.
I've got a few hillbilly stories. The first one is the only one that's even remotely paranormal. So we live in upstate NY, and every year we go to Gen Con in Indiana. And the first year we got lost at around 10 o'clock-ish on the trip back. We missed an exit somehow, and ended up in a real-world Silent Hill somewhere in northern PA. I have no idea what the fuck this town was called, but it was a ghost town. There were no cars on the streets or driveways, nobody walking the sidewalks, no lights on in any windows, nothing. There was also a statue of what looked to be some old dude handing a piece of candy to a kid. It was mostly just unsettling, until the fucking air raid siren went off. Not a fire alarm siren, because the fire station was right there, and the lights didn't come on when the alarm went off. Needless to say, we bolted the fuck out of there ASAP. Well, wouldn't you know it, but next year we ended up in the same goddamn town. And we ended up stopping for gas. It was about 2 a.m. this time around, so there were only 2 people at the gas station. The attendant, and the creepy fucking hillbilly outside. We're talking denim overalls, inbred as fuck, piece o' straw chewing, stereotypical old hillbilly with an accent thicker than tar. Now this is where the story goes all Scooby-Doo. Because the attendant didn't know jack shit, we had to ask the hillbilly for directions to the highway. He pointed us out on the road map, and then told us that instead of going the direct route, we should take his shortcut. A shortcut that literally included the directions, stop at the abandoned farmhouse, and then get on the old dirt road and drive for about 5 miles through the woods. We politely said, "No thanks. This road right here looks like it'll get us back on the highway," and then he got angry. Really, really angry. Then he pulled out a really old cell phone and walked behind the gas station to make a call. We drove off. Haven't been able to find the town since. Don't really want to, either. To this day, I am pretty sure this man was going to eat us.
I have another, more short and less scary story about my adventures looking for my lost dog. After we met the weird people from the hill, me and my little brother went to search on the hill in the forest at the east end of the city. As I said before, we lived near to the urbanized border of the city. A wall of very abrupt hills and forests enclosed this border. There's this one place, that the people call, Hill of the Virgin. As some of you may know, Chile lived 16 shitty years of military government, and that means secret police was everywhere looking for red butts, which means any person that looked remotely democratic. In the late 70s, there was a guy that claimed that the Virgin Mary appeared to him telling that we have to fight communism and stuff. It ended up being a hoax made up by the government, but many people from the hills believed this, and formed some kind of cult around this guy. Years passed, democracy came back and the dark days of the military government faded away, but the cult was around still, and the guy that spoke with the Virgin now changed his sex in some ritual. So, we were there, in the same hill where the cultists lived, away from society. While going around we found an old, big house made from scratch and wood from the near forest. There was no fence or anything. There was in the front a guy, an old white bearded man in a chair with a cap in his head and a shotgun in his hands, fixed, looking at us. It was like the stereotype of the hillbilly made flesh. We were scared as fuck until a lady came out and asked us what we wanted. We told her and she said they never saw any small dog going around there. Meanwhile, the old man was still staring at us, with his shotgun. After that, we went the shit out of there. I always wondered if they were the cultist people of the Virgin's Hill, but never being sure. Still scares the shit out of me.
I used to be in the army. Joined when I was 20 after I realized university wasn't the thing for me. Really enjoyed fieldcraft and generally manly stuff. I'd challenge myself. Let's try and survive in this forest for a week with a rifle with 2 rounds and a knife. Kinda level of stupidity. Anyway, so I'm there in some forest. Used up one of my rounds already, shooting a pretty big pigeon. I ate most of it. Used my other round to make a fire using the gunpowder from it, and made a couple of simple traps to try and catch other birds or maybe something a bit more tasty. So I made my traps, went to my shelter, just a couple of branches and leaves with an opening at one end, and tried to get some sleep. I got woken up around 4 a.m. by hearing something pretty heavy creeping up on me. I was pretty worried it might be a coyote or bear or some shit, but just decided to stay in my shelter. Well, after an hour of snooping, it fucked off. Went to look at my traps the next day, and there was just a note saying, "Get the fuck out my forest." Well, it kinda creeped me out, but I stuck around anyway. I met the fucker who wrote it a few days later. He was actually pretty cool, and it turned out he just thought I was some city kid who was trying to be hard. But I think he realized I enjoyed it and had a passion for it, and seemed impressed I'd survived for 5 days with just my knife and 2 bullets. He gave me his lighter and a bottle of water, so he was a pretty chill guy, really.
Story from my area in northern Ohio. There's a legend about a doctor in the backwoods. The reasonable authorities say he was just a dentist. I beg to differ. Some also say he stole some inbred mutant children from some of the backwater hicks around here. The reasonable authorities say he kindly adopted some kids with hydrocephalus. But the reasonable authorities never saw what became of these kids. The family they came from was a fierce lot. Feds tested some shit on them back in the 30s. They inbred before that and they inbreed now. It lead to some real mean bastards. Anyways, these kids were real gentle-like, at first. Then Doc got around screwing with them and they became mean. He put lots of morphine in their heads, stunted their growth. Kept them out in the yard so they would get pelted with rocks by the local kids. He taught them to do awful things. Taught them how to kill an animal with their bare hands, how to take down a grown man and tear him apart, tested on trespassers and drifters that he so kindly took in, taught them how to take carnal knowledge of a woman without her consent. His poor wife was bedridden so they went after her. Sick bastard he was. One day they must have decided that they'd had enough learnin' and took ol' Doc down. They'd been trained as runners. They could run just as fast as an automobile. They jumped on that man and killed him. Almost like a graduation ceremony, come to think of it. Well, they made themselves some basic clothes out of corn husks and have taken up residence in the Ohio woods ever since. Honestly though, they aren't all bad. I had one experience that convinced me of the nobility of some Southerners. I was down in Georgia for my aunt's funeral. Well, afterwards, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. It was late but I was an intimidating guy so I figured I'd be alright. We were staying on the family plantation, not slave owners. My folks stole it off some miserable bastard who became indebted to them after they came of the boat from Ireland about 130 years ago. Anyway, I was walking through the forest when I heard a click behind me. Turned around and there were 2 inbred freaks like from Op's picture. They start yelling at me about my family coming over and stealing their family's land. Thanks great-grandpa. This is the 3rd time your historical licentiousness and Gaelic awesomeness and revelry has fucked me over. Well, I'm pissing myself. They're talking about how they're going to cut a piece off of me every day and feed it to his dogs. How they're going to take me back to the cabin and attack me in the ass for the rest of my life. Never thought deliverance was accurate, but whatever. Then one of the guys' heads fucking explodes. I'm freaking the fuck out. Inbred freak number 2 is freaking the fuck out. So then, some guy makes some kind of yell somewhere out in the forest. I mean, a fucking yell filled with pride, joy, and righteous anger. Then some old guy with a gray goatee, mustache jumps out of the woods in a full Confederate uniform. Saber, rifle, revolver and all. His rifle's smoking, so I assume he's the one who shot deformed freak number 1. He says to me, "You best get out of here while you can, city boy. These wit trash might not be much alone, but you get them riled and they're a real pain in the graw," said in a perfect upper-class Southern Mont's voice. I asked what we do with the body. He pulls out a stick, lights it, and it turns out it's a torch. He torches the body and tells me to leave. He says he'll track down the other hillbilly, who had since run off. Never saw the guy again. No one knew who he was. I assume he was some Grizzly Adams motherfucker who inherited the uniform from his great-great-granddaddy.
There is this place in Denmark, where my grandparents live. It's not as bad as any of these stories, but I thought I'd contribute, because my grandparents are the worst of them all. It's a town with about 20 houses or so, all farms or used to be farms. My dad grew up here and I believe he is the only one who have ever moved away from that town. My uncle is still there, my grandparents is still there, and my aunt, the woman my uncle married, is also from this town. If a townsmember dies and their house is occupied by someone else, no one will talk to you, and that has resulted in people leaving because they're feeling uncomfortable living there, since all they are to the hardcore town members is, "That guy who lives in Bent's house," or something, never their own name. I don't go there anymore. They also stare at me when I come, and my grandma and grandpa also hates me, because I am the daughter of the man who left the town. Also, you never leave the town. If you do, you are being watched when you return. TL. Dr. Creepy Town shuns all new people and outsiders.
Any folks with some creepy hillbilly stories? No, but I can do one better. I was in the British Army from 2003 to 2007. Obviously, I got to meet some quite interesting people. One of the biggest nutcases I ever met was a Lance Jack in the Welsh Guards. He was from the Rhondda and no one understood a word he was saying. Quality rugby player and a mean boxer. Anyway, we were in a fob one night and we were due to withdraw next day. So I'm sat there in the makeshift toilet having a wank. I won't give you the details, but it was pushing 40 degrees, so you can imagine it was getting pretty tasty in my little hovel of filth. I finish up and go out into this little courtyard the Afghans used to trade women, goats, AKs, opium or whatever in before the Talibs kicked them out. People started talking about the compound being haunted by Russians. I brushed it aside as bullshit and went to the briefing room. After a few hours of cleaning weapons, boxing and playing football with the Annanite was coming. Everyone mounted up and the place fell silent. All of a sudden I hear this bizarre language in the distance. I whip out my weapon, this isn't another wank story, and get on the radio and inform of a possible breach. There he is, on top of a rock, minding his own business. The boyo from the Rhondda sat there, stark naked, belt of 7.62 link around him, GPMG slung over his back and a mountain goat lying down over his legs as he sings it to sleep in Welsh. Apparently it's quite common to do so back in Wales when you have a restless animal. He was an out-and-out country boy though. Oddly enough, aren't most of the Hicks in the rural south of the USA descended from Welshmen?
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.